Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with my Shakespeare retelling recommendations. So as you guys will have already seen, I am very excited about All the World's a Page, which is our upcoming Shakespeare-themed readathon happening in July. I'll link my announcement and of course my co-host announcements and the Google Doc and everything related to the readathon down below in the description, so be sure to check that out. But what I'm going to be doing today is to be recommending some of my favorite Shakespeare retellings. In that Google Doc you will find all of the challenges and a kind of master list from myself and my other two co-hosts, Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe and Julia from Shakespeare and Such. So we all kind of like pooled our resources and we came up with what we hope is a pretty comprehensive list of all of these Shakespeare retellings or Shakespeare related books that we know about. So we haven't read all of those, we wouldn't necessarily recommend all of those, but we did list them according to which play they retell. So that is one resource, but we also wanted you guys to have some more like personalized recommendations and options. So this is going to be my opportunity to specifically put a good word in for the Shakespeare retellings that I have read and really loved, and that I would recommend to you guys. And as we go, I am going to note which Shakespeare play they specifically retell so that you can kind of fit these into challenges. And I'll actually also include a few movie options at the end, because depending on which path you want to take, you might end up watching a Shakespeare adaptation, which is always fun. And even if you're not picking that readathon path, these would just be really fun movies to watch anyway. So starting with books, I'm actually going to start out with the only one on this list that I am not quite sure counts, and that is Enthusiasm by Polly Schulman. Now this is overall a Jane Austen inspired book, but I was like 95% sure that there are some Shakespeare play elements, and specifically from As You Like It. Like there's a point where one of the characters puts, I think he puts like love poems on trees or something like that, which you should not nail things to trees, first of all. But I do remember there being like several distinct references to As You Like It that I think would make this book count. But if you pick it up for the readathon and there's no Shakespeare references at all, I'm gonna say you can still count it because that is my fault and not yours. So feel free to count this if you want to. But this one I read actually several years ago and I want to reread it. But it's really fun and lighthearted. It's about a girl and her best friend is somebody who always goes like really hardcore into the things that she enjoys. She kind of goes through phases with different things, and this time around it's Jane Austen. And our main character has always loved Jane Austen, and now her best friend is getting like super into it and going like way overboard. And then there are also some like hijinks that ensue because I think there's a boys' prep school near them. As you can see, it's been a few years since I read it, but everybody's feelings start getting kind of mixed up because I think at one point both girls aren't in love with the same boy, and it sounds like it would be really messy, and some of it is messy, but I remember being very satisfied with how it ended. So this is kind of a like honorable mention because again, it's been a while since I read it, and I'm not technically sure it would count, but I'm giving you my special dispensation as the creator of the readathon that if I'm wrong, you guys can still count this anyway. Next, I have the Theatre Illuminata trilogy by Lisa Manchev. I'm actually holding up the third book, So Silver Bright, because this was the one I had accessible to me. But I think actually the first book, which is, I think Eyes Like Stars. Yes, that one is actually the one that I think has most Shakespeare elements, although this is the one that has more of Ophelia. Overall, I would say that you could count this trilogy as being Midsummer Night's Dream inspired or Ophelia inspired. And this is definitely not a direct retelling, it's just like kind of slightly inspired by some of Shakespeare's plays, but like 4 of the fairies from Midsummer Night's Dream are a part of the series. Ophelia is actually a character in the series who I really enjoy. She's not our main character though. Our main character is a girl named Bertie Shakespeare Smith, and she lives in this place called the Theatre Illuminata, basically where I think, is it all of the characters from plays and stories or something? A lot of characters live and they kind of put on the plays, and that's what happens when somebody reads a book, I think. The book does a much better job of explaining it. Oh, I didn't think of this, but you could also count this for The Tempest, because Ariel is a very significant character in the series, and he is the like kind of wind spirit from The Tempest. So you could also count this for that play. And this is a series I have like somewhat mixed feelings about. I definitely love the first book, and there are some scenes in the second book that I think are worth reading just for themselves, and then I have some real issues with how the trilogy ends, specifically because of some of the love triangle things that happen, but I can like wholeheartedly recommend the first book, and if you really enjoy that one, I think you might enjoy the rest of the books as well. Although, like me, you might be disappointed in how some things go, depending on your love triangle preferences, or character preferences, I guess I should say. I would also say that this is a good series if you have a pretty high tolerance for whimsy, because some of the plot can feel like kind of haphazard, but it's just so much fun, and Lisa Manchev is just so good at creating settings. Some of the dialogue is also really funny. Like, there are a lot of things that I really like about the series that make me overlook some of the less developed parts, like just some of the plot choices are interesting, but it's definitely a very imaginative and whimsical and creative series, and I would recommend it if you are intrigued by the idea of all these characters kind of existing in the same world. I think that's really cool, and also if you're open to a very whimsical world, because I really enjoyed the world building retelling overall. I just think that if you're somebody who likes to have like the world building and the magic and all of that laid out for you and kind of explained and very consistent, you would probably hate this. But other than that, you might enjoy it. I also really like Birdie has kind of a like storytelling kind of magic, and so that is something really cool as well, even though again it can be kind of inconsistent in the way that it's used. Next I have Magnolia by Christie Cooke, and this is a sort of contemporary reversed Romeo and Juliet, and it's set in the South in the United States. And the reason I say this is reversed is because like it's inspired by Romeo and Juliet, but it's sort of the opposite in that these two families are actually really good friends, and for generations they have been hoping that they would have like teenage or young adult kids at the same time so that they could matchmake them and they'd be like officially part of the family and everything. And then when that finally happens, our two main characters, of course, despise each other. And this is another one that I read like a few years ago, so I don't have as many details to share about it. I just remember this being like super engaging. The two leads end up having to like shelter in the same house because is there like a hurricane warning, I think? Some kind of big storm, and it's not safe to go outside, so they end up having to basically live in the same house for a while and get used to each other, and of course they start to get to know each other and realize that there's more to the other person than they thought. And I've recently seen some people review it who have pointed out some like very valid criticism of like certain conflicts that come up. Again, I don't remember all the details for that, but I remember this being fun when I read it. I don't know how helpful this recommendation is, but I had a good time when I read this a few years ago. Next, I have one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Still Star-Crossed by Melinda Taub. This is like, you would put this in the Romeo and Juliet retelling category, but it's really a continuation of Romeo and Juliet from different characters' perspectives. So this happens after the events of the play, and basically the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues is still going on. The families still hate each other, and there's actually been, it looks like there are attempts by somebody to actually sabotage the attempts at peace between the families. So then the Prince of Verona gets the bright idea to arrange a marriage between Rosaline and Benvolio. Benvolio is from the Montague family and Rosaline is from a branch of the Capulet family. So basically recreating Romeo and Juliet, and he's like, if we make them get married, that'll just calm everything down. Which I just like don't know what he was thinking, because obviously that did not work the first time, but moving on. Benvolio and Rosaline hate each other, and one of the things that I really like about this book, so this is hate to love, but it's really well developed hate to love. So I think even if you're not always one for that kind of antagonistic relationship, you might still enjoy this, because I think they have very, very good reasons for why they don't like the other person and why they blame the other person. And so when the prince kind of like forces them to be engaged, they decide like, we can't stand each other. We're going to solve the mystery of who is sabotaging the attempts at peace. And then when we figure that out, there will be no reason for us to like get married anymore. So this works out for both of us. But of course, as they work together and they start to kind of get deeper into these secrets and lies and mysteries of what's going on, they end up spending a lot more time together and realizing that they misjudged the other person, and of course they start really caring about each other. So their relationship is just so well done. I also really like some of the other relationships in this book, like the sister bond between Rosaline and her sister Livia is just so beautiful to see. I love the way that was explored. I really like the writing of this book. It's got a little bit of Shakespeare flavor without being off-putting if you're not used to reading a lot of Shakespeare. Like there's just the perfect amount, I think, of inspiration from his language while also being very much Melinda Taub's own story. I also thought the ways that she incorporated the original Romeo and Juliet story while kind of changing some things and making them her own. I thought that was super creative. I just really loved everything about this book. Every part of it I thought was beautifully executed. Like I said, it's one of my favorite books and highly recommend it. Next I have one that has a little bit of a similar premise, and that is Prince of Shadows by, I think, Rachel Kane. I don't remember if that's the author, but it'll be on the screen. And this one also actually follows after the events of Romeo and Juliet, and it also follows Rosaline and Benvolio and their relationship. I find it kind of funny that a lot of authors have kind of had this idea. They're both very, very minor characters in the play, but they're great. I love them. And this one I really enjoyed, but I think this is the case of this book suffered by comparison because, again, it did have kind of a similar setup to Still Star-Crossed, and that's one of my favorite books of all time. So it's kind of it kind of maybe wasn't the book's fault that it didn't measure up to that, but I do think Prince of Shadows is a really solid book. This one has also got kind of a mystery aspect, but it's a little bit more of a supernatural mystery because there's some question about like if there was an actual curse at work that was the reason that Romeo and Juliet ended up dead, and they had this like consuming passion and all of this. I thought it was very interesting the way that this book actually played off of how fast their romance was. It like made it a plot point, which I thought was really cool. Mercutio was also a really important character in this book, and I love Mercutio. I thought the author did some very interesting things with him, so I would definitely recommend this one. Again, personally, it's not my favorite of the two, but it just comes down to personal preference. Like I don't think the characters were as well developed developed, and I didn't find the romance between Rosalie and Benvolio nearly as compelling as in Still Star-Crossed. So I think those are some of the main reasons that this one wasn't my favorite. Like, I don't think it was just because I had enjoyed Still Star-Crossed. I think there were actually like differences, but I would still recommend Prince of Shadows, and especially if you are more of a plot-focused than character-focused reader, and or if you are interested in that idea of the curse. Next, I have one of my favorite books I read last year, and that is Midsummer's Mayhem by Rajani LaRocca. As you can probably tell from the title, this is a Midsummer Night's Dream retelling, and it is middle grade, and it is own voices for the Indian American representation, and this is just an absolute delight. So our main character is a girl named Mimi, and she loves to bake, and she decides to enter a baking competition, and then because this is a Midsummer Night's Dream retelling, fairy magic and hijinks ensue. There's some confusion about like who has a crush on who, people are acting strange, and Mimi starts to realize that some of her baking actually seems to have magical properties. It's a very cozy and warm feeling story while also dealing with some harder topics, not in a way that feels very heavy. Like I've read a lot of like very serious or heavy middle grade, and this is not one of those, but it does still deal with some of the hard issues kids are going through. Like it deals with friendship breakups, it deals with family relationships and not feeling like you always fit into your family, or like feeling like you have to create your identity in the way that it differs from that of your siblings. There are just some beautiful family moments in general. I loved the baking magic. That's something I really enjoy. And of course I loved all the Shakespeare elements and references. There were also some great friendships in this book that I really loved, and like this book just made me so happy. I think this is definitely one, like if you're looking for a little bit of a pick-me-up, I think this book could be a great one for that because it is so feel-good and so sweet, and it definitely has some like sprinkles of harder topics, but overall I would say this is a very like positive and heartwarming book. And finally, the last book before we get into some movie recommendations is An Assassin's Guide to Love and Treason by Virginia Baker. Now this one would count as a retelling of Twelfth Night or as a book that features Shakespeare as a character. So in this book we follow two main characters, Lady Catherine and Toby, and they're both kind of spies on opposite sides of this conflict because Lady Catherine and her father are Catholic, and this is at a time when that is illegal in England. And her father's actually killed during a raid on their house, and she decides that to get revenge for his death, she's going to join up with these anti-queen spies. And Catherine thinks by going against the queen she can get revenge for her father's death because he was killed based on her orders or her laws. And then the other main character is Toby, and he is working on Twelfth Night with Shakespeare, and he's kind of on the opposite side. He's like working to protect the queen because they know that there is some kind of plot against her life, and they're trying to figure out what that is. And so Toby's kind of in an undercover capacity as he's working on Twelfth Night with William Shakespeare, and then Catherine disguises herself as a boy so that she can try out for a role in this play because of course at this time men played all the parts in plays. So the only way that Catherine can get close enough to kind of put this plan in motion, because they're going to be performing this play for the queen, is if she can be cast in this play. And she does get cast, and so her and Toby kind of end up becoming friends, spending a lot of time together. Of course, Toby doesn't know who she is, and she doesn't know that he's on the other side of this conflict. And this is just such a good book. Virginia Baker is so good at communicating the setting and the atmosphere. Like, I think she had an amazing balance of the lighthearted, like, humor moments and the really serious consequences if these characters get caught. Like, you really felt how much Catherine was in danger. You felt what it was at stake for both Catherine and Toby. We also have some queer rep in this book because Toby is bisexual, and the way that was handled in that historical context was, I think, very thoughtful and really interesting. And I think it also helped get rid of one of the plot holes that can often happen with these like cross-dressing stories, because you know how sometimes you read a book with cross-dressing and a character, like let's say you're seeing it from the perspective of the girl who's dressed up as a boy and she's falling in love with the guy, so all of their interactions she's kind of seeing them romantically, and then from the guy's perspective it's like he's spending time with another man, and if up until that point he has considered himself straight, like if he's having these romantic feelings, like when he maybe question or just like think about like, oh, this is interesting, just maybe like think about the fact that he's like attracted to another guy. I don't know, I just always find it very weird when that isn't brought up in those kinds of stories. And in this book, I think having Toby be bisexual, it adds a really important layer to the story. It's a really thoughtful way to explore that in a time period where it's like obviously gay people still existed, just because they weren't acknowledged or they didn't use certain words, it doesn't mean they didn't exist. And then on top of that, I think it also makes their developing relationship much more believable because Toby can be attracted to guys and girls, so the fact that he is having romantic interactions with somebody who he knows as a boy named Kit, that makes sense. Also, not to say that you have to have a plot reason for making a character gay, I just wanted to point out that I think the way that Virginia Baker did that, it did a lot of things really well for this story, and one of them was getting rid of a very annoying trope that can happen quite a bit in these like cross-dressing plot lines. And also, as I mentioned, Shakespeare was just such a fun character. I think she did some very interesting things with him, but overall, I really enjoyed it. Like, we really don't know a lot about his, like, personality and just about him in general, so I was pretty much fine with it. Okay, so now just going to run through some movie recommendations really quick, and these are going to, I think, hopefully be quick, most of them, because a lot of these are very well known already. Like 2 rom-coms, She's the Man, which is a retelling of Twelfth Night. I think that one is hilarious and a ton of fun, and I really also like the Easter eggs for Shakespeare fans. I just feel like this is a really enjoyable movie. And then 10 Things I Hate About You, which is a Taming of the Shrew retelling. I don't think this needs an introduction. A lot of people know about this movie. I really enjoy it. Also, The Lion King. It's literally Hamlet with lions. I remember when I found that out, it like blew my mind, but it's, I guess, a lot more obvious in hindsight. Also, Warm Bodies, that like zombie rom-com that came out like a few years ago. I actually quite enjoyed that one. I didn't realize it was like loosely based on Romeo and Juliet until I like saw that mentioned somewhere. So it's not immediately, it's not like a direct retelling, it's not super obvious, but I had fun with it. I'm somebody who hates horror, and I still really enjoyed that. I will say that for somebody who hates horror, there was a little more gore than I was expecting, just because, like, obviously it's a zombie movie, you should expect gore, but the fact that they were marketing it as like a rom-com and like this is a horror movie for people who don't like horror, I was expecting there to be a little less gross or creepy stuff, but again, I'm a wimp, but I still really enjoyed this. I also want to recommend the Much Ado About Nothing movie. Like, Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh as Beatrice and Benedict are just absolute perfection. Like, the way that they play off of each other, like the banter, the acting, it's just amazing. I love them. Beatrice and Benedict are like my favorite couple ever, and I feel like they just perfectly encapsulate them. I love that movie so much. Kate Beckinsale is really good as Hero. Denzel Washington is amazing as Don Pedro. I love him. I think he did such a good job with that. And I remember watching some like behind the scenes stuff, and I don't remember if it was Kenneth Branagh, because he also directed it. I don't remember who was talking about it, but they mentioned like his performance is a great example of how you don't need to have a British accent to do a wonderful job with Shakespeare, because Denzel Washington kept his American accent, and he just did such a good job with that character. Ugh, I love him. And I feel like this adaptation overall would be a really good one if you're just kind of getting used to Shakespeare's language, because the casting overall is so good, except for Keanu Reeves. I'm sorry. I like Keanu Reeves, but in this movie, he just was not good in my opinion. But overall, the casting of this movie is just so good, and like all of these actors do such a good job of making the language feel conversational that I think this would be a great one to kind of start out with if you're getting used to the sound of Shakespeare's language. Because generally, like, if you're watching somebody who's a good performer, you'll kind of get the gist of what's going on from the way that they perform, the way that they say things, the way that characters interact with each other. Like, obviously you get better at it the more you do it, but you can kind of follow what's going on if the performers are good, which in this movie they definitely are. I also want to mention The King, which is on Netflix. This is a relatively recent, was it just like a couple months ago that this movie came out? And it's a retelling of Henry IV. Which part is it? I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'll put that information in the description or on the screen somewhere. But I thought this one was really interesting. I'm actually going to link my friend Huck's video down below, because she did a whole like review or like why you should watch this movie. She went super in depth, and I just really love that video. So definitely watch that if you want some reasons to watch this movie. But I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite Shakespeare movie adaptation, but there were quite a few things I enjoyed. And finally, my last movie recommendation is kind of a random one, but I love it. And that is the ballet version of A Winter's Tale. And that was a co-production between the Royal Ballet and the National Ballet of Canada. So like, Winter's Tale is one of my least favorite Shakespeare plays. It's so weird. It makes me really mad in some parts, and it's just like, it's just a very strange story. But this ballet made me really appreciate and enjoy it. I think obviously if you already enjoy ballet or dance, you probably would be more inclined to enjoy this one. I think just the storytelling of this ballet and the way it was filmed and everything, I think this is a pretty accessible one, even if you're not like, even if you don't watch a lot of like ballets and everything. I just think they did a really great job of adapting this story. I found the characters like more interesting in some cases. Like, the dancing is obviously beautiful. I think they really did a great job of hitting the emotional points as well, which was another issue I had with the play. Sometimes like really dramatic things would happen and people wouldn't react in a way that felt quite believable. So yeah, like this is probably one of my favorites actually on this list. Like, I just really enjoyed this one, and I think it's especially cool because A Winter's Tale is not a very popular Shakespeare play. It's not adapted very often, and so the fact that they chose to make a ballet out of this, I think is really cool. I feel like I was moving my hands a lot in this video. I'm sorry. I feel like if I don't like have a book that I'm holding or something, my hands just go all over the place. Okay, everybody, so those are some of my absolute favorite Shakespeare retellings. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read and enjoyed any of these, or if you have a Shakespeare retelling that you would like to recommend. I really hope that you can join us in July for our All the World's a Page readathon. We are like so excited, you guys. You don't even know. Like, it's a little embarrassing how excited I am, so I'm not embarrassed at all. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!